What leadership role did you take in Wisconsin RID, and what are your memories about that?
Well, I was the treasurer for 7 years, and then also later was a trustee for a few years. At that time, when I was president, well, not the whole time, but part of the time, Mike Sinattle was also president. I was treasurer, actually. I wasn't president. I misspoke. I wasn't president. I do remember that Evelyn was president, you know, in the early days. And then when I started, I can't remember exactly what happened, but I was in those two roles with Wisconsin RID, and we worked together, you know, very cooperatively. That's how I remember it.
Were you directly impacted in your job by interpreters as time went by?
Well, the last job before I left Milwaukee, I would say yes. I worked at what is now referred to as Independence First, and at that time was called SUSL. I was the first deaf person they hired. Now you have to understand, they didn't really have the money to do this. They didn't really want to hire me. And as I know it, Eve Dicker and Lynn Lucius were both on the panel. And I think they discussed and tried to encourage them to get interpreters. So, when I started, I had student interpreters, of course, and at the same time, UWM had an interpreter training program for a full year at that time. And it was shortly after OHI, which is now called the Office for Deaf and Hard of Hearing, it was shortly after they were established. They hired an interpreter here in Milwaukee, and OHI allowed SUSL to use that professional interpreter for meetings and things. And so really, that was my first real experience using a lot of interpreting services. And, you know, I was probably teaching some of them what my needs were. But also, after working there, we didn't have the ADA yet, but we did have Section 504 of the Rehab Act. And some places were required to have interpreters if they received federal funding. So I would have to sometimes explain that to people as well. And I would have to help encourage them to get interpreters. I do remember sometimes there would be refusals. And I would have to go with a person and demand in writing their explanation of the denial of service. And so, you know, then they would make sure they got an interpreter.
So in your job, you became kind of an advocate
Yes.
for interpreting.
Right. Oh, yes. Yes. I had to advocate for interpreting and advocate for deaf individuals.